Every 2 years or every year, depending on your age and class of certificate, you sit across from an aviation medical examiner and they decide whether you're still allowed to do the thing you love most, fly. But most pilots over 50 obsess over the wrong things before the exam. They worry about their blood pressure reading on that one morning. They worry about their cholesterol number. They Google how to pass a medical the week before. But almost nobody asks the bigger question. What if the next 20 years of your flying career, and honestly the next 20 years of your life, come down to one decision you make today in a gym, not in a doctor's office? I want to talk to you about a book today. It's called Younger Next Year by Chris Crowley and Dr. Henry Lodge. It's not an aviation book. It's not even really a fitness book in the way you're thinking. But I'd argue it might be the single most important book a pilot over 50 can read. More important than your next ground school refresher, more important than your instrument currency. Stick with me for the next 30 minutes because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why and exactly what to do about it. So let's start with the book itself because the setup matters. Younger Next Year was written by two men. Chris Crowley is a retired lawyer, not a doctor, not a scientist, just a regular guy who, in his late 60s and 70s, decided he was not going to accept the slow decline everyone told him was normal aging. His co-author, Dr. Harry Lodge, was an internist at Columbia who spent decades treating patients in exactly the demographic most pilots fall into: accomplished, driven, high-functioning people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who suddenly found their bodies betraying them. The book is built around a deceptively simple idea that Dr. Lodge had been circling for years in his clinical practice. Most of what we call aging between 50 and 80 isn't aging at all, it's decay. And decay is optional. That distinction is the entire engine of the book. And it's the reason I'm doing this video for pilots specifically. Here's the structure of the book in plain terms. The first half is Dr. Lodge explaining the actual cellular biology of why your body falls apart, and more importantly, why it doesn't have to. The second half is Crowley's or Harry's rules, a practical, almost military-grade set of instructions for what to actually do about it. And here's the line that, for me, after decades of watching how people actually age in my own practice, sums up the entire 300 pages. Exercise is not something you do for your body. Exercise is a biochemical signal you send to every single cell in your body, telling it whether to grow or to die. Let that sink in for a second because it's not poetic language, it's literal physiology, and we're going to get into exactly how that works in a few minutes. Here's the concept that once you understand it, changes how you think about every single day of your life after 50. The book calls it decay is the default mode. Think about an airplane that sits on a ramp and never flies. Nobody crashes it, nothing dramatic happens to it, but seals dry out. Tires develop flat spots. Corrosion starts in places you can't see. The battery dies. 6 months later, that airplane that was perfectly airworthy is now going to need an annual that costs more than flying it for 2 years straight would have cost. Nothing attacked that airplane, it just sat there. And sitting there was the attack. Your body, after about age 40, works exactly the same way. But it's actually more aggressive than that. Because your body isn't a machine, it's a biological system. And biological systems have a built-in command embedded at the cellular level that says, if you are not being used, you're not needed. And so it begins breaking down. Dr. Lodge explains this in terms of two compelling biochemical states your body cycles through constantly. C6 or cascade 6, this is roughly the inflammatory catabolic breakdown state. It's driven by stress hormones and inflammatory signaling molecules. In this state, your body is told to conserve and shut down. The growth and repair state, on the other hand, is driven by exercise, by physical demand placed on muscles, tendons, the heart, and the brain. This is the state where your body releases growth factors, repairs tissue, builds new capillaries, strengthens bones, and this is the part most pilots don't know, grows new connections in your brain. Here's the brutal part. At any given moment, your body is in one of these two states. There is no neutral. There's no between. There is no maintaining. You are either signaling growth or you are decaying every single day. And without deliberate physical exercise, your default, especially after 50, drifts hard toward decay. Your body, left alone, assumes you're an animal in low resource environment that should be conserving energy and shutting down systems it doesn't think you need anymore. Muscle mass that isn't used gets broken down for resources elsewhere. Bone density that isn't loaded gets reabsorbed. Brain pathways that aren't activated get pruned away. This is exactly why so many otherwise sharp, capable people, including pilots, hit their late 50s and 60s and suddenly feel like they fell off a cliff. They didn't fall off a cliff. They were on a slow, steady decline the entire time, and it simply became visible all at once. The good news, and this is the entire optimistic core of the book, that signal can be reversed at almost any age, starting today with deliberate exercise. Your body doesn't know how old you are. It only knows what demands are being placed on it right now. Now let's bring this directly into the cockpit, because this is where I think the book becomes essential rather than just interesting. Flying is one of the only professions left where your body is literally, legally, the limiting factor on your career. You don't get to negotiate around a failed medical the way you might negotiate around a bad performance review. The FAA doesn't care how many hours you have, how many type ratings, how much your airline or your flight school needs you. If your body doesn't meet the standard, you are grounded. Full stop. And the systems the medical exam screens for: cardiovascular function, blood pressure, blood sugar control, vision changes related to vascular health, certain neurologic red flags, are almost all systems that respond directly and dramatically to exercise. Not might help a little, directly and dramatically. But there's a second, quieter issue that doesn't show up on a medical form, and it's arguably more important: cognitive sharpness in the cockpit, decision-making under workload, reaction time, working memory during an approach, in deteriorating weather, the ability to multitask between ATC instruments and traffic. These are brain functions, and as we're about to cover in detail, those functions decline on a predictable schedule unless you intervene. And exercise is, by a wide margin, the single most powerful intervention we know of. So when I say this book matters more for pilots than for general population, I mean it literally. You have a hard deadline every year or two where your body's actually condition gets checked by a professional. And a fail doesn't just affect your health, it ends your flying career. Let's go through every major benefit of exercise the book covers in detail, starting with the one most people are completely unaware of. Exercise grows new brain cells. For most of the 20th century, the medical consensus was that you're born with all the neurons you're ever going to have. And from that point forward, it's a slow, irreversible decline. That turned out to be wrong. And the science that proved it wrong is a huge part of why Dr. Lodge wrote this book. We now know that a region of your brain called the hippocampus, your primary center for memory formation and spatial learning, which not only coincidentally is exactly what you use to build a mental picture of where you are in relative terrain, traffic, and the airport, continues to produce new neurons throughout life. This process is called neurogenesis, and the single most powerful trigger for it that's ever been identified is aerobic exercise. Here's the mechanism, and I want to walk through it because it's genuinely remarkable. When you do sustained aerobic exercise, such as running, cycling, swimming, brisk walking, rowing, your muscles and your brain release a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. Researchers have nicknamed it miracle grow for the brain, and that's not an exaggeration. BDNF does three things simultaneously. It stimulates the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus. It strengthens and protects existing neural connections, making them more resistant to age-related decline. It increases something called synaptic plasticity, your brain's ability to rewire itself, form new connections, and adapt to new information. Which, if you think about it, is exactly what you're doing every time you fly a new approach, fly a new airplane, or handle an unexpected situation in the air. Exercise also dramatically increases cerebral blood flow, more oxygen and nutrients getting to the brain tissue, and it increases the density of capillaries within the brain itself, essentially building more delivery infrastructure for that oxygen and nutrients. The cognitive payoff that's been measured in study after study includes improved working memory, faster reaction time, better executive function, the part of your brain responsible for planning, prioritizing, and decision-making under pressure, and a measurably reduced risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease later in life. I want to say that last part again slowly because it's the one that should matter most to anyone who wants a long flying career. Regular aerobic exercise is one of the most well-documented, evidence-backed ways to reduce your lifetime risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Not a supplement, not a puzzle app, exercise. Think about what that means for a pilot specifically. The exact mental functions and AME, and frankly, your passengers and your crew are counting on quick reaction time, clear decision making, the ability to hold multiple variables in your head during an unstable approach are the exact functions exercise protects and strengthens. Now let's talk about the heart, because this is the most direct line between exercise and your medical certificate. The book lays out in detail Dr. Lodge developed treating patients exactly like you, how the cardiovascular system responds to exercise versus inactivity. Inactivity allows arteries to stiffen, allows the lining of blood vessels, called the endothelium, to become less responsive and less able to regulate blood pressure, and allows a slow buildup of arterial plaque that, when it finally announces itself, often announces itself as a heart attack or a stroke with zero warning. Exercise reverses essentially all of that. Aerobic exercise strengthens the heart muscle itself, increases the volume of blood it can pump per beat, which means a lower resting heart rate and a more efficient heart at every level of exertion. It improves endothelial function, meaning your blood vessels stay flexible and respond properly to the body's needs, which directly affects blood pressure, one of the single most common reasons pilots get flagged and deferred on a medical exam. It improves your cholesterol profile, generally raising HDL, the good cholesterol that helps clear plaque-forming particles from your arteries, while helping manage LDL and triglycerides. It improves insulin sensitivity, meaning your body manages blood sugar more efficiently, which lowers your risk of type 2 diabetes, another major medical disqualifier and a condition that, once present, requires ongoing monitoring and documentation for every medical renewal. It reduces systemic inflammation, which research over the last 2 decades has identified as a quiet driver behind heart disease, stroke, and a long list of other chronic conditions. Put simply, the exact items on your AME's checklist, i.e. blood pressure, EKG findings, your cardiac history, are directly measurably improved by consistent aerobic exercise. This isn't a maybe, it's some of the best established science in all of medicine. The next one surprises people because we tend to think of cancer as something that either happens to you or doesn't, almost like a lightning strike. This research doesn't support that view. Regular exercise has been linked to, in large population studies, to reduce risk of multiple specific cancers, including colon cancer, breast cancer, and endometrial cancer, with growing evidence for several others. The proposed mechanisms include exercise's effect on lowering chronic inflammation, improving immune system surveillance and function, regulating hormone levels, particularly insulin, estrogen, both of which are tied to certain cancer growth pathways, and helping maintain a healthy body composition, since excess body fat itself functions almost like an endocrine organ, producing inflammatory signals that can promote cancer growth. None of this means exercise is a guarantee against cancer. It isn't. And no honest source would claim that. But the data is consistent and substantial. People who exercise regularly throughout midlife have measurably lower rates of several major cancers than people who don't. For a pilot, where a cancer diagnosis can mean a special issuance process, extended grounding, and in some cases the permanent end of a flying career depending on the cancer and its treatment, this is not a minor benefit, it's a direct protection of your medical eligibility. Now, the book is very deliberately not just about living longer, it's about health span, which is the number of years you live in good, functional, independent health, as opposed to lifespan, which is just the raw number of years you're alive regardless of condition. This distinction matters enormously, and it's where the book gets its title. Crowley and Lodge are blunt about this. A huge number of people add years to their life through modern medicine while simultaneously losing quality from those years. More medications, more limitations, more dependence. The entire goal of this book's approach is the opposite. Compress the period of decline into as short a window as possible at the very end, and keep the decades before that functioning at a high level. The data backing this is substantial. Large longitudinal studies tracking tens of thousands of people over decades consistently show that people who maintain regular, moderate to vigorous exercise into their 50s, 60s, and 70s and beyond have significantly lower all-cause mortality, meaning lower risk of death from essentially any cause, compared to sedentary peers of the same age group. Some of the research the book draws or suggests the difference in functional capacity between an exerciser and a non-exerciser in their 70s can be larger than the difference between a 50-year-old and a 70-year-old. Read that again. The exercise habit can matter more to your physical condition than 20 years of chronological aging. Now, I want to bring this all the way home because this is, for me, after decades of watching how this plays out in real people's lives, the single most important section of the entire book. Crowley and Lodge make the case with real clinical and statistical backing that for most people who do not actively intervene in the last decade of life looks something like this: declining mobility, declining independence, a growing list of medications, a growing list of limitations, and very often a slow loss of the things that made life worth living, including, for many of you watching this, the ability to fly. But here's the finding that should change how you think about every single workout for the rest of your life. The people who exercise consistently through their 50s, 60s, and 70s and beyond do not just live a little longer, they dramatically compress that period of decline. Instead of slow, decade-long decline that strips away capability bit by bit, they tend to remain highly functional, highly capable, and largely independent right up until a much shorter, much later final decline. The book's own phrase for this is blunt and unforgettable. The goal is to live like 50 until you're 80 and then die fast. Not slowly fade for 15 years while losing your medical, your independence, and your ability to do the things you love one at a time, Stay strong, stay sharp, stay capable, and compress the decline into the smallest possible window as late as possible. For a pilot, I don't think I need to spell out what that means. It means the difference between flying actively into your late 70s versus losing your medical at 62 and spending the next 2 decades watching other people fly. It means the difference between being the pilot your grandkids remember flying them around the patch versus being the guy who used to fly. The last decade of your life, and whether you're in a cockpit or in a hospital bed for a meaningful chunk of it, is being decided right now. Not by genetics, not by luck, but largely by whether you exercise consistently starting today. So what does the book actually tell you to do? Crowley and Large lay out a specific weekly structure, and it's simpler than most people expect. Aerobic exercise roughly 6 days a week, not all out every day. Most days, moderate effort with some harder efforts mixed in. Walking briskly, cycling, swimming, rowing, the elliptical, whatever you're actually do consistently. Strength training at least 2 days a week. Muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of healthy aging, and it's one of the first things to decline if you don't actively train it. Consistency over intensity. The book is emphatic that showing up most days for the rest of your life matters infinitely more than occasional heroic efforts followed by burnout or injury. That's generally most of it. This isn't a book demanding you become a competitive athlete. It's demanding you stop accepting decay as inevitable and start sending your body and your brain a daily signal to grow instead. If this video helps you think about your flying career and your life a little differently, hit subscribe, drop a comment with your home airport, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching and thank you for subscribing.